who are from Franklin or lived here a while, if you've been up to the Carter House and you've stood in the smokehouse when the sun has been shining and you see all of the bullet holes reflecting inside, it's an amazing sight to see, and more importantly, it's an incredible story. And we know that this is the 159th anniversary of the Battle of Franklin this week. We had some reenactors in town Sunday afternoon that were recreating that. I love living history. I love history. And so we're certainly glad to support that here at the police department. And we're also glad to welcome our colleagues and friends from the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department who are going to be making this presentation today. I have several members from the Franklin PD that are here today that are part of our crime scene technician unit, and I know they're fascinated. Some of them were up there when you were using your new tool. And this, to me, you know, we have in our, I don't think it's in, yes, Historic City Franklin, but this is 21st century policing in historic Franklin. So that's especially interesting to me. Again, welcome all of you, welcome members of the Metro PD, all of my colleagues who are here from Franklin, and just members of the Franklin community and those who love history. Thank you for being here. And so now it's my honor and privilege to introduce someone I think all of you know, and that's Eric Jacobson, who is the CEO. You're next, right? They told me, get up here. They told me you were. I'm kind of bossy, you know. But we're glad to have him here. We're fascinated with the books that you have written and the dedication and all that you have given to the city of Franklin and that you do constantly to keep history alive. And I know Julian Bibbs here as well, a big supporter of the Franklin Battle of Franklin Trust and all of his buddies. So thank you for choosing our department and for doing this up at the Carter House. We continue to be fascinated with that story. It's a powerful story of what happened here in Franklin all those many years ago. It's important to keep it alive. So thanks for being here.
All right, thank you.
And I'll turn it over to you.
What do I have, 5 minutes? 2 minutes? 3 minutes? All right, I guess I'm talking now and then I'm talking a little bit later on, so I won't waste a lot of time. We'll let the police officers come up and talk about the fun stuff. But just to sort of set the table, not so much about why we did this. Why we did this is we received some communication, and of course we said yes, because to investigate the damage, not just at the Carter House, but really it's, I think, emblematic of what happened really across the battlefield on November 30th, 1864, was something that we couldn't say no to. So there was work done on the Carter House, there was work done on the smokehouse, and of course the farm office. For me, I don't differentiate between the farm office and the smokehouse as far as the battle is concerned. In fact, I'm probably personally more fascinated with the smokehouse, so wait till you see what some of the evidence indicated with that building. But a little bit of background. Obviously, today is November 28th, so everything is going into high gear. 159 years ago, federal cavalry, which was picketing the north side of the Duck River, had begun to abandon their positions in the face of Confederate cavalry. And during the night and into the early hours of November 29th, Confederate General John Bell Hood laid out plans for a flanking maneuver which would culminate at Spring Hill. It culminated in a failure for the Confederates, but great success for the federal troops who escaped that night and arrived here just before sunrise on November 30th. I was just telling the police officers what the federal engineers and soldiers did on the morning of November 30th should not be underestimated. I think for many people it has long been either forgotten or completely underestimated. This was largely a veteran army, and they set up a defensive position which was not meant just to protect them and the engineers who were, you know, just a half mile kind of to our north and northeast working on the bridges. It was meant to maximize casualties. What the federal troops did that day was set up killing zones. These were soldiers who were quite accustomed to the tactics that had really spawned in 63 and 64 and turned the Civil War into the first of really the modern wars. I don't know if anyone's had a chance yet to see Napoleon. Napoleon maximized pure blunt force, which was to use troops as shock troops. You simply tried to overwhelm the enemy. What happened in the Civil War is the weapons had advanced from Napoleon's era, so the shock value often turned into bloody fiascos. But there were many successes. What happened on November 30th, 1864 was not just a massive Confederate attack, it was a combination of sheer power and force, skill, heroism, bravery, luck. The Federal soldiers saw something coming at them that afternoon that even among veterans they had never really seen, because it was an open battlefield. It was a clear, bright day, and it was a spectacle. I mean, we describe it every day. I can't even begin to tell you what it must have really been like. You know, too often I think we can romance this up and we can just talk about, you know, this happened and this happened and this happened. Just take a moment and consider what it must have been like to watch 20,000 soldiers come right at you, knowing full well they'd kill you if they got the chance. That sort of takes a sport out of, you know, whether it's a movie or a reenactment. It becomes very real. And the Confederate soldiers blasted a huge hole in the main line, which is what we're going to hear about. They, of course, advanced about 1.5 miles, 1.75 miles. It's commonly said that they came 2 miles, but it's really much less than that because the Confederates deployed down in the area. So if you were to draw a line from this side of Target west to Lewisburg Pike, that's about 1.75 miles on a straight line. They overrun the advanced line, which is a 1/2 mile south of the main line, and then they hit the main line. And it is very close. I know as someone who, I don't, you know, just talk about this endlessly. I actually wrote about it. And I think for far too long it has been, we've made a lot of progress, but this is generational work. You know, for a long time this was just a bloody fiasco. Hood was an idiot. The Confederates never had a chance, so forth and so on. Oh, I got so tired of that so many years ago because it really underestimates the importance of what happened here. That the Confederates came this close to pulling this off, to pulling off what would have been an incredible victory. And the best evidence of that was what was written by the Federal soldiers. And some of the evidence that you're going to hear is testament to that. They barely held on. The Federal troops barely held on. And only through a combination of circumstances did they hold on. And what happened right there in the center, both east and west of Columbia Pike, was a maelstrom of horrors. And that should not be forgotten. We're not just looking at bullet holes. We're not just looking at strike marks. We're not just looking at cool stuff. We're looking at absolute wholesale slaughter of human beings. And that this is what we really did to each other for the better part of 4 years. You know, by the time this was over, there were almost 10,000 casualties, almost 2,500 dead. I told someone just the other day there were as many soldiers in Franklin, or nearly as many soldiers in Franklin that day, as there are people living in the town today. Imagine taking the whole population of Franklin and jamming it out there and then have them get into open warfare with one another. That gives you some sense of the spectacle of it. The farm office and the smokehouse and the Carter House found themselves caught in the middle of this. And the damage has been evident really since the day after the battle. The Carters lived with it. Veterans came back and saw it. And, you know, now 70-plus years of tourists have seen it. Only in recent years, though, have tourists been able to see the inside of the farm office, which if you have seen that is an experience really like no other. As someone, I can honestly tell you I've been to just about every major battlefield. Well, I've been to every major battlefield of the American Civil War. That's how sick I am. There's nothing like this. I mean, there isn't. There is nothing like what you can see up there, and there is nothing like what you're going to see in a short while. There are two things I'll follow up after the presentation that I think the evidence has proven. And I say that because it is, you know, sometimes in the field of history, you're fighting against not just time, and you're not just fighting against old myths or misunderstandings, but sometimes you're fighting against what other people said 10 or 20 years ago. And that's hard because someone predates you, that settles into someone's mind, and to try and extract that and to go back in and sort of reteach them or get them to learn it again is very hard. There are two things that were clearly proven to me, both east and west of this center of the battle that I think are incredibly revealing. So take a few minutes and think about what happens over the next 48 hours from Columbia to Spring Hill and to Franklin, and that this gets compressed, those 2 days, those 48 hours, and in some ways 3.5 years, gets compressed into this incredibly violent thing, almost like a supernova when it goes off. You know, it falls in and on itself and then just implodes. Franklin was a spasm that was indicative of what the war had become by 1864. So don't forget that as we talk about the evidence and what the forensics really show us, at least something of an inside look into what really happened that day, now almost 159 years ago. Thanks.
Good morning. Before I introduce myself, I want to introduce my colleagues. Officer Stephen Jones. Say hello. Hi. Officer Doug Belcher. Retired Officer Chip Linville. You will or might hear from all 3 or 4 of us. My name is George Boughton. I'm a retired police officer. I am still a certified crime scene investigator. I worked for almost 31 years for the Metro Police Department. 28 of those, I was a crime scene investigator. It was a very long career, and both myself and Officer Linville, when we retired, we went right back to work for the police department. We're very blessed that they had a spot for us. This is our documenting, analyzing the ballistic evidence at the Carter House. The outline of what we're going to talk about is overview of the crime scene investigation section, shooting incident reconstruction, 3D scanner basics, drones and photogrammetry, Carter House investigation, and the results of the investigation. An overview of the crime scene investigation section. We are a 24/7, 365-day-a-year operation. There is a crime scene investigator in Nashville working all the time. We have sworn and civilian. There are police officers, and there are also civilians. We document, process, collect evidence. We have certifications. Like I said, I'm a certified crime scene investigator. We're all certified crime scene investigators through the International Association for Identification. Our investigators also go to the National Forensic Academy in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It's part of the Law Enforcement Innovation Center there, attached to UT Knoxville. CSI facilities are in Madison at the precinct there. That's where our crime lab is. Shooting reconstruction was always my interest. The goal when you're doing shooting reconstruction is to determine origination and, to a lesser extent, sequencing. You kind of want to find out where the bullet came from. And over the course of a shift, that may be something that a crime scene investigator is called to. Bullets are predictably unpredictable once they leave the end of the barrel. That's a fact. You can have an idea what they will do or may not have an idea what they're going to do. Ballistics is the science of a projectile in flight. This is an example. Internal ballistics is everything that happens inside the weapon. External ballistics talks about the bullet's flight path. And terminal ballistics is what happens when it reaches its target and its terminus. Flight path concerns the path of a projectile in flight. You will hear the term flight path and trajectory both used. Neither one are wrong, but you might hear someone say trajectory. It's the same thing that being discussed. Flight path rods are used to measure the angle of impact. We need corresponding defects to utilize the flight path rod, and the margin of error you like to have is plus or minus 5 degrees. What this case is right here, what's showing is a homicide from 2012, and this is why we do this. The story from the scene was that there was an individual that said he was on the ground whenever he fired a shot that killed another individual. And you see the flight path rod right here with a laser attached to it. You show the flight path. And that's where my ending point was somewhere in the hallway. So that's evidence that showed, yeah, he may have been on the ground whenever he fired that shot. And I'm gonna step over here. You'll see on the, I guess, your right, my left, that is a shooting reconstruction kit, and this is a flight path rod that we will use. And I'll have to use my outside voice for this, but this is a mock-up of a section of drywall that shows you how flight path rods are used when you're doing shooting reconstruction. It says, this is a model of modern cartridge ammunition. You've got your projectile, you have a primer on the end, your propellant is on the inside. Cartridge ammunition was around at the time of the Civil War. It was in its infancy. It wasn't very, it had issues early on, and it just hadn't caught on yet. So what happens when this goes through, when you have a projectile in flight, is when it strikes your surface, that's what we use. We call those defects. And you'll see that in just a minute also, especially when Officer Belcher gets up here. This is an example of the zones of possibility for a flight path, just like the one in the previous slide. You see, yeah, that's legitimate. That's doable. This one, no, that's not how you would see it, and that is no, it didn't happen that way. Again, a defect. It is damage produced on a target from a projectile impact. Another way that we can use the flight path rods is if we have, this is a leading edge, and if you don't have, we like having two defects whenever we do the shooting reconstruction. If you don't have two defects, if you've got a good enough leading edge, you can use the flight path rod in that. Keyhole defects. This was upstairs, I think in the bedroom on the south end of the Carter house. And what this is you see the base of the bullet, and then this is the pointy end of the projectile. What happens when you have a keyhole defect? And there were several that I saw out there. This bullet has destabilized in its flight path. For some reason, something has happened. It's either went through a window, it's gone through a wall, it's starting to tumble. There was more than one of these that we identified at Carter House. And this is always an interesting defect where in this specific bedroom, I think it might have been a window or something maybe that it came through. There wasn't enough to where we could see where that first defect was. But this is a secondary defect, and it's destabilized. This is an embedded defect, or an embedded projectile, I'm sorry. And this is the second time we've done this. We, on the 28th of February, we did a very similar exercise, very similar at Sunnyside on 12th Avenue South. And there was a section of the building that had been remodeled, or they were in the process of being remodeled. And being the old guy of the bunch, I still like finding things, just like I did when I was a full-time crime scene investigator. And this, I just looked up and said, all right, guys, there's another one. So, yeah, I found that one. The interesting story with this one was, this was in our presentation that we did at Fort Negley. This particular bullet, it went out over YouTube and they recorded it for YouTube, and it was also on I guess, the Metro Historical Site, the video, I think. But within a very short time, my fault, go back. Within a very, very short time, someone took it upon themselves to go out there and pry this bullet out of this timber. And my thing with this was, it was the 1860s, the last time human hands touched this. And it's been there the whole time. And now it's gone. So, but before I turn you over to Stephen, two things briefly. What got me interested in things like this was there was a prairie fire in 1983 at the Little Bighorn battlefield, and Dr. Richard Fox, I think he made this his doctoral presentation. They took metal detectors and went over the whole battlefield, and they did something very similar, much larger scale than what we did, except they did a forensic mapping of the entire battlefield at Little Bighorn. And in closing for me, I can't stress enough the importance of this. This was training for us. Everyone that was out there at the Sunnyside Mansion, everyone that came out to the Carter House, we did this is the first time. Did I do that? Blame it on me, it's my fault. When we did the Sunnyside Mansion, that was the first time that we had ever taken two technologies, Faro and drone technology, and put them together. And everyone out here, we didn't know it, but on March 28th, I think it was, we were going to be out investigating the Covenant School. The same thing, those two technologies are put together. So this was training for us, and these two cases are a way for us to give back to the community.
My name's Douglas Belcher. I've been a crime scene investigator with Nashville for about 15 years now. About 12 of those years have just been in crime scenes, so 15 years total as a police officer for Metro. The main thing that I do in there is our Faro technology, which is the scanner. The one slide that you saw up there is pretty much my only slide for now. I'm going to be back at the end to talk about our results of it because I put all that stuff together. So I will be the one that speaks on that. Officer Jones will, there we go. This will be my one slide for now until we get back to the really awesome stuff. So this is the 21st century of ours. What Officer Boughton just talked about was our old school way of doing things. We are into a new school way, which is incorporating 3D scanners along with drone technology to be able to map crime scenes that we go to. So for this investigation, for this documentation that we did, this is what we use. So what it does is it spins around a full 360 degrees, takes photos and points of whatever it is. So if I activate the scanner right now, it would spin around, it would get points. So if you can imagine a bunch of dots on the wall and everything that's in this room, and then remove all the actual objects but keep the dots right where they were, that is how this scanner works. So if we move this around the room in multiple different places, it's going to do that in each individual place. And at the end, we can take all those scans, it will find common points between each one of those and create what I like to refer to almost as a sandcastle. So if you build a sandcastle, you got a bunch of individual grains of sand, but it's three-dimensional. You can walk around the sandcastle, look at everything. Each of those points is those grains of sand. So when we do the scans with these on all of our crime scenes, it is frozen in time. We can now go back. Most of the time we go to court on things that we scan 3, 4, 5, 10 years later. That crime scene is now frozen in time, and I can look at every portion of it and move around it in multiple different areas. So that is what this provides us. So utilizing this on the Carter House, we are able to freeze now the house and the grounds in time to that specific area of where we scanned in that moment. So with that, we did 81 scans. This was the second most scans that we've ever done on any kind of scene that we went to. The main one is Covenant. We did, I think, close to 271 scans for that. So this was one of the top ones that we did the most scanning on. With that, We had about 1.32 billion points in there. So each one of those points is measurable. We would be able to click on any one of those points, click another point within that cloud. We'd be able to figure out the exact distance of what that is. So as a measurement tool, it's second to none. The margin of error is 0.208 fractions of an inch. So any one of those points could be off by that much. So that's pretty accurate. That's even lower than 1/4 of an inch. Most of the ones that we get are actually 0.08, because most of the time we're doing a single room for depending on the crime scene that we're doing. So that is what this can provide us, is that level of accuracy that we are able to recreate, go through, and be able to investigate at a later time. After that, we can create diagrams from that, and we can also create fly-throughs. So if we wanted to, you'll see one of those for the Carter House in just momentarily, but if we needed to make a video that we can play on the stand to show a pathway of a suspect possibly entering or a victim, we can show the view that they would have had moving through the structure. So that's it for the 3D scanner right now. I'm gonna pass it over to Stephen Jones to talk about our drone technology, and then after that, we'll get into the meat and potatoes.
Good deal. Well, good morning. Like Doug said, my name's Steve Jones. I work in our crime scene investigation section. I've been with the police department since 2009. I've been with our crime scene investigation section since 2015. And since 2017, we have been using drones, like the one that's up on the screen there and sitting over here on the table, to take our aerial photographs. The way that we had previously taken photographs from the air was to call the police department's helicopter or go meet them at the hangar where they were at, and then fly over top of the scene and take photographs with our camera basically hanging out of the side of the helicopter. And y'all laughing obviously can realize what limitations would be associated with that. Obviously the quality of the photos is not going to be as good as what we can do with this. And additionally to that, it was a very broad view of the scene. We were seeing a very large area. We could not get very low. Most helicopters, unless they're landing, are not flying below 500 feet or 400 feet. And so this was a sea change for us in terms of a way to capture photographs of these scenes. What they afford us, aside from being able to take photographs, is that we can perform autonomous mapping missions. So I can draw a box around an area that I want to take photographs of, and I don't have to fly. It does all the work, and it takes those photographs. What you're seeing up in this area right here, each one of those little red dots, and this is all from the Carter House, all the photographs and the maps and the models that you're seeing here from Carter. What you're seeing of each one of those red dots is where the aircraft took a photograph in place. And so it's moving pretty quickly, and as it flies these grids, it's taking a photograph. We can specify a lot about the photographs we want taken. We can tell them how much we want them to overlap. That's super important for us to be able to get a product out of this, is to have photographs that overlap each other, typically 75% in front of and 75% on the side of. We can also tell it how we want the camera pointed, whether we want it pointed straight down or whether we want it pointed at an angle. The reason that you would want it pointed at an angle is because if you think about looking straight down at the ground, you can see the roof, but you can't see anything on the side of a building. So having it at that angle creates facade details, the sides of that building, and we can actually get information on there. And so what we end up with is we will take the photographs that you see that were all taken at each one of those little red dots. We'll put them into a photogrammetry software. Photogrammetry is just a really fancy word for taking measurements from photographs. It's not anything new. The first photogrammetry was done in the late 19th century. Of course, it was done in a very different way than taking digital photos with a drone, but the same concept applies with it. And so once we have those photographs, we'll put them into photogrammetry software. The software we happen to use is called Pix4D. There's lots of other softwares out there. It's the one that we use. And it is able to create both an orthomosaic, and an orthomosaic is what you're seeing over there on the far right, in that area right there. Orthomosaic just looks like a Google satellite view, except what's so special about that is it's a view of the actual scene. There was a time where we would use Google Satellite to trace and then do our diagrams for outdoor scenes with that. Now we can actually do the scene as we find it. So it creates that orthomosaic that looks like a Google Satellite view. And the other thing that it creates as well is a 3D model. So this model right here that you all are going to see is created from a point cloud in the same sense that this creates a point cloud. The aircraft can create a point cloud by taking those photographs, putting it into software, and it creates those points. It doesn't do it through the laser that's inside of here. It does it just through those photographs, putting them into the software and creating a point cloud from those photographs because the photographs overlap. So it's very good accuracy. It's not quite as good of accuracy as this is, but it's very good for accuracy over large areas. This is the same software and technology that was used for the Christmas Day bombing when the FBI came. We assisted them by scanning scenes with this. And this is very good for small areas, but we have to scan every 10 steps to connect the scans together. So you can imagine that would become very tedious if you were doing this over large blocks, or in the case of this, a large historic site. So this is very good to fill in data that you can't see from the ground, or data that is just so vast and it's not super critical to the actual incident, in the way that this is very good for filling in that data that's very critical to the incident because it's so accurate. We took 965 photos. It took about an hour to take those photographs, running multiple batteries through the aircraft, and we were able to create 184.2 million points from those photographs. And each one of those points is a point in space. The color detail is drawn from the photographs. So each one of those points gets a color, and that's how you get a photorealistic representation of the scene. We measure accuracy with photogrammetry in a way called ground sampling distance, and basically what that is it's the size of the pixel in the scene. So each pixel was about a half an inch. These photos obviously are made up of pixels. And then the actual level of accuracy that it could be called is usually 2 to 3 times ground sampling distance. So a little bit more than an inch is probably our margin of error, which again is much larger of a margin of error than this, but you can cover huge areas with it. It's very helpful for that. And you can see down here as well, we've got the photos that are those overlapping ones as well. So this investigation was just like any other one. We started out by documenting the scene as we found it, taking photographs of the scene. I ran those mapping missions I was telling you about, where I draw and set up those grids where the aircraft takes the photos autonomously. And then Doug was taking measurements of the defects using the flight path rods that George showed you, measuring to the horizontal plane and to the vertical plane with a protractor and an angle finder, and then taking that data and placing it into the software that we use with our Faro scanners here. And you can see Chip, Officer Linville over there completing those Faro scans out there on the east side of the Carter House. As far as the numbers that we came up with, we had a total of 59 defects that were marked. The reason that we only measured 57 of them was because 2 of them were, as George touched on earlier, in that second floor south bedroom, likely coming in through the window from the ground level, but they were keyholes, and we really couldn't do a whole lot with that. Doug's going to talk about this as well a little bit later, but we like to have multiple defects that correspond to each other to take those measurements rather than just working off of one. So we like when 2 of them line up, because we can line that rod up and we can be much more accurate, especially when we're doing this 159 years later with buildings that are maybe not exactly the way that they were when the battle occurred. So what you see over here on the left is the scan data from the air, so to speak, of the Faro scanner. And what you see over here on the right is the scan data from the drone that was taken and created in that Pix4D photogrammetry software. And so you can see this area right here, highly accurate, really tight in on it, and then it's this area right here filled in with all the other data. By doing that, we were able to put together this model. And Doug also put in all of the measurements that were taken with the tools that you see over there. And we're going to do a fly-through of this. And we're going to be checking out all the different angles here of the battlefield and of the Carter House and the other corresponding buildings. Each one of these rods that you see here that are yellow or red, green or orange represent a bullet flight path in this scene. Obviously, there are a number of defects on the farm office, and a number as well when it comes to the smokehouse. This was something that when we were getting set up, Eric had told us he had a particular interest in, was defects that were noted on the west side here of the farm office. And what we've been able to do is, after taking those measurements, take these rods that are small, like you saw that George had shown you earlier, and pull these out into space. And because we have the drone data to fill in where that space gets to eventually that's much further away, we can fill this information in much further. And we're going to basically, as we go through the rest of the presentation for the remainder of the time that we have with you, we're going to be filling in little vignettes of areas that we saw that were of interest and that we found with the defects. And you all are seeing a lot of those here in the video itself. Doug's going to touch on some specifically interesting ones as we move through here. But you're also just going to see the Carter House in a way that's very different than you all have ever experienced when you've been there. To be able to fly around, to get up off the ground, to get back down to the ground, and move through all these structures. So I'm going to step aside here while this runs and maybe input myself here briefly at times, but we'll just let you do this fly-through. I am going to speak to a couple of different things that we've seen so far. As we move around outside, you can see there were some white areas, and those are going to be just because the trees were very full at that time of year and we weren't able to see what was underneath those trees with the drone. But we were able to scan almost all of the interior rooms here. And the other thing that you're going to get to see here in a minute as we move from the south room here on the first floor to the north room is we're going to be able to go upstairs. My understanding is that's not typically part of the tour, but you're going to be able to see up there if you all have not had the opportunity to see the upstairs of the Carter House. As we finish up the video here, I'm going to turn this over to Officer Belcher again, and he's going to look at some of these more specific, interesting things that we saw in the course of that video.
This one, and then the top one does the. Yep. Okay, awesome. All right. So now, time for the fun part, the actual results of what we found and what we saw here. So going through the house, y'all just saw what a jury would see on the stand. You just went through the crime scene. You were able to look at a bunch of different things as opposed to the photos that you saw before. They're static. They don't move. That would be what you're presented with to try to make a judgment on, as opposed to a video that you just flew through the place and could look at a bunch of different angles. That's the new technology that we're using. So when it comes to this, the results of this, first off, we obviously have a lot more what we would call defects, bullet strikes, holes that are in the wall that we did not document. So we first had to make a determination of how are we going to do this. We have, like Officer Boughton just said, and Officer Jones, a lot of the defects that we use, we either want to find correspondence, two defects that match up with each other. We can stick a rod through both of them. It's anchored into where it is. If we don't have that, a leading edge for that defect would be the next thing that we look for. So for something that's 159 years old, that obviously has been painted over multiple times, settled, how do you do that? So a lot of these defects that you see circled were the ones that we actually used. Now, without the correspondence, for the people that may have been to the Carter House and haven't been, the other side of this wall does not have sheet rock or anything on it. It's a bare wooden wall. It's the exterior and then the studs that are in the wall. So how do you find correspondence, or how do you find a leading edge on something that's been painted this many times? That's where the studs in the wall are. So every single one that we used were in the studs. So we could easily find that path that went through that stud and able to use that to anchor in where these shots came from. So the rest of the rounds that are in there, they still mean just as much to people that look at them, but for an actual crime scene standpoint, they don't tell us anything with them being as old as they are. We know that they entered the structure from outside, but next to that, we can't give you anything that makes any kind of sense to that. But with these that are actually in all the studs that are in the wall, we have an exact angle of where it struck that and went into it. This is an example of that correspondence. So on the outside, the south side of that wall down towards the bottom, you can see how it entered the structure, and on the inside there is still a baseboard that was there. You can see right here that baseboard is still there and showed an exit to this, which is this defect right here coming through. So we actually have correspondence with these two. This is normally what we would want to look for in a crime scene. This would tell us a very more accurate example of what a flight path would have been. A lot easier for us to measure that because it's anchored in 2 points. So when we went through initially, this is everything that we looked for. Do we have 2 holes? Can we stick a rod in those 2 holes to measure that? We didn't have that for most of them, so what we had to do is take the rod, place it into it, lean it against the leading edge, so the leading edge, as the round strikes the surface, it starts removing some of that surface, it embeds it. That tells us where it came in, at what angle it came in. If we take that rod and lay it into that leading edge, that's what can give us what our angle is. So all the rest of them, along with them being able to go into these studs that were in the back of the wall, we're actually also able to find that leading edge to put that rod into. So that's why we chose the ones that we chose, and the other ones we couldn't really do anything with. So what you're seeing here is an example of a trajectory cone. Okay, so every round that is fired, now we have a plus or minus 5 degrees on all sides of it, up, down, left, right, that round could have came and struck that surface. This is just one example of that because it's coming from right to left, it's coming from the east heading towards the west. It was easier to distinguish so you can get a feel of what that looks like. So that cone, as it comes further out, starts getting wider and wider and wider. So that round that strikes this surface could come from anywhere within that circle. This is a better example. So when you see it start getting cut off, that means it's going into the ground now. So as you look at it from the side, you can see how it's still getting wider as it goes out, but more than half of it is embedded in the ground. Every area that was within this area is a possibility that that could come from. And that's pulled back as far as that can go to anything that would make sense for where someone would shoot. So we did this one so it'd be a little bit easier to understand what we're looking for. Normally, obviously, crime scenes we go to, 10, 15 shots may have been fired. Maybe half of those we can actually do. If the shooter does not move and we do this, we can find out the area that they came to. So this is really important when we're doing actual investigations that we do. This is what it looks like with all of them activated. So we turn on those cones for every single one of those that were brought out of the back of here, and you start seeing a pattern somewhat. It looks like straight out the back, and it's starting to fan to the left. So that was something that we were interested in. Without coming into this, and I don't think any of us knew much about this battle at all, we didn't know movements, we didn't know anything about what happened. We reached out to do training here with this, and we came out here and did all the stuff that we normally do on a crime scene. We didn't know what units were moving which direction. We came into it completely blank like we would on a crime scene. We didn't have video, obviously, of this occurring. So we have to go off of what our training is and how we document things and see what it tells us. We interpret all of our stuff in the evidence that we see. We don't talk to witnesses. We don't do any of that. So what is the evidence telling us? Well, it's telling us that whatever happened here came straight out the back, and it looks like it's fanning off to the west, which for us, looking at this structure, obviously there's a lot of holes in it. It didn't make much sense to us. We figured there'd be holes everywhere in the structure. But on the east side, over here of the structure, I do not recall seeing many, if any, shots in the east side of that building, which was very strange to me. Between the two, the farmhouse, which is the red roof, and the smokehouse, you saw defects between that corridor, and then more that was on the west side of the smokehouse. So all that was telling us that these rounds are coming west to east and directly from the back of it. And in my mind, if this was a battle, it would have been stretched across everything and everybody would be pouring rounds into this. So why is it just this side are vacant of shots? We didn't know, but this was how we were documenting it. This is what it was telling us. So I'm going through in our minds, this is what tells us, this is what we go back and tell our detectives, and they move forward with an investigation after the evidence is presented. So this is looking towards the west from the east side of it. This is one of the things that we found that was pretty interesting. Out of all the shots that were coming out of it, all the shots went about 100 feet to 200 feet out from the back of this. That's where they ended. They started going into the ground and that ended, but you also have to keep in mind that cone of possibility. Even though they end in the ground, the top of that cone is still moving forward. So it still pushes it back further even though it's going into the ground. This one, however, I think I hit the wrong button, was hugely interesting to us because it's going straight into the soffit from down below. What does that tell you? I couldn't tell you. There's multiple possibilities. Accidental discharge, packing around in, it goes off in your hand. You're running up to the back of a building and your rifle drops and it fires straight up into it. Couldn't tell you what that came from, but all the rest of them showed your angles coming straight in like this, and then you have this one that's pretty much going straight up into it from below. So it was just one of the more interesting ones that we saw when we were investigating this. So inside the farmhouse, there's this closet. There was 2 defects in there. We were obviously very interested because this actually showed correspondence as well. When we're talking about sequencing, can we place those doors back where they were when this was happening? Well, we can. The doors were closed. We know that. If I hit the right button, as it enters here, there's corresponding defects back here. It bounces off the ceiling and then goes into the wall that's over, you can't see it from this photo, but it goes over here. So you have 2 defects here. This one right here is what you're seeing here. If this door was open, that wouldn't be able to do that. So this is the type of stuff that we look for in crime scenes, where the door is open, where you're down the ground, where you're standing up. This is the evidence that tells us that door was shut. If someone told me that this door was open when this happened, I'd have a lot more questions about that. This is a top-down view of the same farmhouse. Out this side, I keep hitting the wrong one. This is going to be towards the south. This will be towards the north. This is that closet you were just looking at. So as you can see, those rods, we're able to stretch those out to as far as we want to stretch them. So we can take them out through a window, out through wherever they are, but that's what it would look like. We've removed the roof so you can actually get a better layout of what the floor looks like in relation to the walls. This is just another angle of the same thing. As you can see, one of the rounds looks like it's coming through the window. One of the rounds, it's kind of hard to see in this picture right here, but that is another hole right here. Now, I would love to say in a perfect world that that absolutely came out of that hole. There's no way for me to ever know that. With as much damage as is on the backside of this wall and that 5 degrees, I would never say that that came from that one. Could it have? Yes, absolutely. I don't know what exactly the wall was that was supposed to be there before it was removed, but it also has to go through an exterior wall, an interior wall, whatever else is in the room, and then end up there. So I would never say that it came from that, but it's a really good thought that maybe it did. So, southeast corner of the smokehouse. This is going to be the interior. What you're looking at here is this right here. So between the 2 buildings. We documented several defects on this. Let me see. This is what they looked like. Modern ammunition on brick does not do that. You don't see that. These are lead rounds that don't have copper jacketing. So this has been, I don't think any of us, as far as I know, have ever seen this until we looked at it here. So what's happening is the lead, as it's striking it, is basically lead splashing. It's kind of blowing up, but it's also rubbing off like you'd use an eraser on a piece of paper. So it's rubbing and leaving the lead behind, but it's also leaving a great elliptical stain for what I'm probably going to keep referring to it as. This is almost using geometry and a bunch of other stuff that we can measure the length and width of that and be able to tell an angle that it struck the surface. We use that in bloodstain pattern analysis. It's never been really used for shooting reconstruction, but we've never seen this before. Now, how do you document it? Now, this is what we call a frangible surface. So modern rounds, when they hit brick, tend to blow up the brick. This did not happen. We see it a few times, obviously right here, because absolute determination. This is coming from the Carter House heading south. All of these rounds that strike this surface that we were able to see and look at, most of them are coming from the north heading towards the south. So with that, we can take that and measure that length and width of that, and we were able to get some trajectories off of that. Now, how comfortable I feel going to court and talking about that, we've never do it like this, so I don't know. It might be something we try to enter, but in the end, it's iffy. But I think you'll be interested when you look at those exact same things that we put in there. That's where all of them came back to. A better way of looking at this is this. So we activated all the cones. That is where those shots were coming from or could come from. Come right between the buildings. Didn't strike any of the other buildings. So this gave us a very good, for training purposes, realization that this may be something that makes sense. It hasn't been tested. We haven't done a lot of research on this, but it makes sense. So it's painting the entire, and I guess I should have said that. Everything that cone gets bigger is where the shot comes from. So you need to the originating spot is not where the shots are. As it gets bigger, that's where they could be. So they could be anywhere within there, where more than likely for us, we believe it probably came from both sides of it as they're shooting through. But nevertheless, that's the possibility from those shots. This is on the other side of that, looking south, those same shots, just giving you a better angle of what's happening there. It's another shot of that. So you have to keep in mind, they're going into the ground. You see them going into the ground, but those cones will bring it completely up onto the porch, all the way across it. This is going to be the west side of the smokehouse. So if you're looking at the back of the smokehouse and the farmhouse, this is going to be on that west wall of it, going straight into it. This right here, what you're seeing, is a lot of very circular defects, staining that we see. Same type of stuff before, lead splash that we're seeing on here. What this tells us is you've already seen the rest of them. You saw it was elliptical, that it was at an angle. These are very circular. What do you think that would tell you? Straight on, correct. So with those being straight on, we can still put the exact same rod coming out of there with that 5 degree of possibility, and it puts us in an area that those are most likely would come from. Now, something this old, we may encourage to widen that 10 degrees. There's a lot of ifs and ands about this being as old as it is, but newer type defects that we investigate, 5 degrees is kind of industry standard. We can easily tell within drywall where that rod's going, so it's a lot more accurate. This, we're using a lot of speculation on what it could be. But with those being circular, I would absolutely say you're in the 90-degree range shooting directly into that, the side of that. This is what it looks like. So going upward, this is your north, this is your south, smokehouse. Over here out of the picture would be the other house. These shots are coming straight out here, coming along this path. As you can see, and I think Eric will talk a little bit more about this maybe at the end, but these paths and everything mean something. At the time, we did not know any of this. So again, going into it completely bare, not knowing what these paths mean or anything about it until after the fact when we talked to them. But this is what it showed you. This is just a closer up shot of the exact same thing. What you're seeing here is a different structure that was moved here well after the fact. What we can do with that is remove it. So in the software, we can take it down to the ground like it's not even there. So with this, The building's not there. Right now, if you were looking at this, it would look like those are going through the side of a building. They're not. We can remove that completely, like you never saw it. So inside, this is the southeast bedroom. So if you walk through the door that was to the right, if you're looking at the front of it, you walk into this room. There was a defect that was in the window that was very important. They wanted to know more about this defect. We looked at it and was like, we would like to know more about this one. It's very interesting when they come through. Where is the correspondence to this? We would think we would find something. If it's inside the house, it had to come through something to get in the house. I guess that was the only one that we had. So what it turned out to be, if you remember the screenshots that we had, it came through a window that was on the south side right behind here. I think there's going to be some photos in a little bit that show this. But that round comes through that window. There is also another round that comes through, not here, but on the other window, that comes through that same window. So we'll see a photo of that in a little bit. This is the front of the house, so it's on the east side. There's two defects that actually correspond. It's going through the pillar on the right side of the door and then goes into the framing. We're able to stick the rod in there and lay it in there, be able to get measurements from that and be able to stretch that one out as well. So this is what that looks like. So we're looking at the same door, the pillar, the wall, right here, the pillar. We're able to stretch that out and take that out to infinity if we want it to. One of these rods goes inside where you saw that previous photo, and then a second one was on the outside here. Once we did our rod, stuck it in the same hole, did the same thing we did before, it actually comes through this window, ends there, it comes through this window, and back towards where all the rest of the shots come from. This is a better shot of that. So the initial shot that y'all saw, coming through the window, and then the one that was outside coming through the window as well. Another shot showing that. And here's a better shot of that window itself and how those line up to it. This is just an outside shot showing you kind of the pathways that went into it. Obviously, there's a tree involved, so you can't see the window itself, but this is a general angle of where those are coming from. So conclusions that we drew from this. After we sit there and we think about this and we look at it, what is the evidence telling us? I kind of went over it briefly. It was somewhat confusing. And in my mind of minds, with as much damage as was on here, you just had a line of people down there shooting, slugging it out. Why was there no damage on the east side? Right down here, if you can see, you got the smokehouse right here, and the farm office, which is the building that is shot up right here. We are not seeing any damage coming from the east. It just seems strange to us. We didn't have this map when we first did it. This was coming back and the detective showing us the video of what happened. So after we talked to Eric and we were trying to give what we found, what does it tell you, we were really worried that a lot of the things that we were bringing back and doing our trajectories were ending probably about 100 feet away from the back of the house. We thought we screwed up. We thought something wasn't right. Like this, okay, it's 159 years old, we're gonna blame it on that, but this ain't making any sense to us. After we talked to Eric and the cone of possibility that's involved in it, he immediately, as soon as I mentioned that to him, was like, no, it makes perfect sense. I'm like, explain. And he goes to explain, and I'm sure he'll explain a little bit more about that because he's gonna be a lot better at it than me, is the lines that you see down here are where Confederate troops were. With this house being here, obviously if these people are fighting, these people down here aren't too terribly worried about what's going on over here as much as the people that are right in front of them. So as they start wrapping around this way, these rounds are getting poured in from this way and straight on. So if you can remember, zoom in right here, shows you a better zoomed in portion of that exact area. That's what we came up with. That's what was being shown to us when we were looking at it. All these, where you see the rods start to end, that's when they go into the ground. All the rest of them keep going out. I drug this out 200 feet from the back of the house. All the rest of these, if they're going in the ground, that cone of possibility still puts them very much in an area that could be within a line. That is that other map imposed on top of it. We had none of this when we did this. We did not know anything about all of this. It was eye-opening. We were very proud of our equipment and technology because this showed us exactly what we would see out on a scene, not knowing any of this. We obviously can't take the evidence and make it match what we want it to match. The evidence has to tell us something, and it told us exactly what occurred. So with that, Mr. Eric, I'm gonna
Do you guys have anything else that you want to? Well, first, I want to thank, again, thank Chief Faulkner for hosting us, and thanks to the guys from Metro for doing all this hard work. It's, I guess there's two things I might mention that I touched on earlier. I think this helps prove a couple of things in a way that, you know, evidence can be used in a lot of different ways, but this is some of the most conclusive evidence I've seen that has supported at least two major points. So we'll start with the west side of the smokehouse. I was pretty insistent that we try and determine what the heck was happening on that side of the building, because I had looked at those, you know, those markings for 20 plus years. Jacob Cox, who was headquartered at the Carter House, wrote really the first exhaustive study of the battle, really about 30 plus years after the battle. And so he had corresponded with a lot of people, and he had visited here, and he'd actually mentioned these conical-shaped strike marks on the smokehouse. So I was drawn to those, you know, because everybody was sticking their fingers in the bullet holes in the farm office, and I was overlooking at the smokehouse. Can we go back to the map? See, this is why I don't have the clicker. All right. Right? Yeah, okay. So there's a battery, 4 guns, 12-pounders, 20th Ohio. A couple of things. Okay, so, right, so pretend the cabin's not there, and there are 2 more guns to the left of the 2 that are sitting there today. The federal artillery in the center, 2 batteries in particular, this one and the guns of the 1st Kentucky, which are on the east side of the pike, never really fired that much during the battle. Most of the artillery fire that just rips and tears the Confederates is coming from further east and further west. Why? Well, because there's so much congestion in the center and the Confederates broke through, the Federal gunners were never really able to get off more than 200 rounds per battery. Okay? This battery and the one to the east, which is not that far away, did not fire more than 400 rounds total in the battle. Whereas Ziegler's 4 guns, which were out on what is today about West Main Street and 11th, fired almost 600 rounds themselves. Anybody who's ever been with me at Carnton, I'll talk about the 10 guns that are raining fire down in that area that fired over 1,150 rounds during the battle. Okay, so the artillery fire is very different in the center. The Confederates, let's go back to the map. Because of the way that the Federal line was constructed, you see how in this area it starts angling out to the northwest? They do that, or they did that, because of the topography. They didn't just set up the line like this willy-nilly. They were following the lay of the land. The Confederate divisions that hit the middle, Pat Claiborne's division is east of the road. John Brown's division is west of the road. Claiborne's men are decimated. Claiborne himself is killed. Hiram Granberry is down. There's a lot of confusion in the opening moments of the breakthrough. Those men are never able to penetrate as deeply as the ones on the west side do. Not because Brown's guys are better or Claiborne's are less or anything other than the angle of the line sucks the Confederates in because they can move over terrain where there wasn't an obstacle. But one of the things that happened, and when I looked at those marks, I believe to be true, the 50th Ohio gets blown back almost immediately. The 72nd Illinois starts peeling away from its left flank. Companies are dropping back.
Eventually, the whole thing gets shoved back. The 111th Ohio refuses, turns its left flank on a right angle to connect with the 44th Missouri.
Now, I wrote a lot about the 44th Missouri in my last book because they were new guys. But their line conforms to the main line.
And there's all this wild activity through the garden. Confederate soldiers, we now know with certainty, who got up into this area between the lines, turned east and were firing lengthwise.
Because what they were trying to do was to take out the artillery team. Because this isn't just a four-gun battery. There's a few dozen artillerists who aren't equipped. They have nothing except the officers might have Colt Navies. They don't have muskets. Okay? They have limited ammunition. We'll never know exactly what the Confederates were doing, but for a few seconds, they were trying to take out the artillerists and probably trying to shoot the horses or the mules because they wanted to overrun those guns. That's what that evidence now shows us. And a few of those shots actually splattered up straight along the west side of that building. So that helps us prove that that's really probably about as far as that breakthrough ever got, because I can tell you the 44th Missouri never broke, and the guns of the 20th Ohio were never overrun, and the farm office and smokehouse are their own obstacles. And as we now know, there's fire coming from the vicinity of the Carter House porch and the little brick building, not the log outhouse, but what's the kitchen. Those are probably some of Emerson Updike's men who were positioned about where we are standing right now before they flowed into the fighting. So what we're seeing are some of their fire headed toward the south, particularly between the buildings, which is also supporting what Jacob Cox himself recalled years later, is that Updike's men clustered around the Carter house and buildings when they moved in, because they're trying to shove the Confederates back out beyond this secondary line and even beyond the main line. I will theorize that I think most of the bullet holes that we're actually seeing, you said 59, right? You got evidence from, okay.
What we're seeing peppering these two buildings
isn't just Confederate fire. These are the Confederate soldiers who ended up getting pushed back but weren't killed or wounded right away, and they're hunkered down in the garden. You said 100 feet or more, roughly, was a point of origin?
There are Confederates all outside the main line. They're popping their heads up and firing. I think most of that fire is coming from guys who are here, because if you're in here, you're a dead man.
You can't live in that zone for more than a few minutes. In fact, Confederate General Otho Strahl was hit on the outside of the works as this back and forth fire continues. When I worked on my first book, I talked a little bit about myth and what people have said in the past, and man, I heard everything. Carter House, the Cotton Gin, and Carnton were the houses, the buildings, the structures that soldiers on both sides remembered. It was astounding to me that through all of this, over 48 hours, but let's say the 24 hours from Spring Hill to Franklin, Rippavilla was mentioned once. No one ever mentioned Lotes House. Everbright was mentioned, I believe, once, because these were buildings that were either seen in passing or were out of sight. And if they're out of sight, they're out of mind. This is where the fury of the battle reaches its pinnacle. The reason that we don't see any fire
On this side of that building, or even a lot of damage on this side of the house, or any fire coming from this side of the house, the Confederates never got beyond this area.
it is now abundantly clear that the Confederates never got really, did a handful? Maybe. Not according to the Federal soldiers. because the Confederates were taking massive casualties before they even hit the main line, and then when they hit the main line, there's just only so much the human beings could do.
And as they flowed into this area, they get a secondary line that holds them. Updike's men have already started flowing in, and they literally get hit in the face by 4 reserve regiments.
Which is why Cleburne's division probably never got even beyond, if anybody knows where the Miller House is today, they never got beyond the Miller House. They simply couldn't. They were hit with an avalanche of guys in blue. I mentioned to the officers, one of the things also that Jacob Cox commented on was that Confederate soldiers who they had taken prisoner that night, who they had captured, expressed amazement almost to a man that they didn't understand what had happened to them. Because on the Confederate side, there was a breakthrough. All right? They'd blown up this advanced line, they'd ruptured the main line, and they couldn't figure out where all these other soldiers had come from. They couldn't see Updike's guys because they were down here, and they didn't really have any understanding there was a secondary line manned by the 44th Missouri, the 175th Ohio, the 12th Kentucky, the 16th Kentucky, and the 8th Tennessee, which is altogether probably 2,500 men. And those men entered the fray in a matter of moments. And it's no wonder the Confederates, who weren't killed or wounded and eventually surrendered, simply in the darkness and the smoke, were telling anyone who would listen, what happened? Well, how did this? They didn't even know what went on. Which actually, and I'll close with this, leads to so much confusion in the immediate aftermath of the battle and in the post-war era. The fellow that I worked with on 2 of my 3 books, we would joke with one another that we never understood what it was like to be here. Nobody can, right? I mean, we weren't there. Nobody, even some combat veterans, couldn't understand this kind of combat. The veterans were shocked by this. But one of the things that we began to understand, Rich and I, when we did the work, is that we had a better overall understanding of what actually happened, because we had access to material the veterans didn't. We had access to all these accounts. We had access to now this kind of information, which we didn't have, 2 weeks ago. And we began to have a really better understanding of what had happened not only at Franklin, but at Spring Hill. This had been very confusing. It was confusing because of the chaos. It was confusing because of the sunset. It was confusing because of the darkness. Remember, it's a day past new moon. So once it was dark, it was dark. And there was just confusion reigning in every direction. This has really helped at least clear up a couple of things for us. And we will work this into our interpretation now as a really solid piece of, in some ways, conclusive evidence, at least of 59 different trajectories, predominantly Confederate. But as we look at it, you stand out there and you think about how many bullet holes are in that building and how many are in the smokehouse. You look at the kitchen and you look at the house itself, and it's little wonder that some of the men were astounded that they were able to escape this without being killed or wounded, because there was just lead flying in almost every possible direction. So again, thanks for your work. You've now become part of the Battle of Franklin story, whether you know it or not. So thank you all. If you have any questions, I might answer them. Dan?
Yeah, the narratives that we've heard in the past, that part of that was at the end of it, there were soldiers piled up, people literally couldn't fall over. Does this sort of understanding of the movements help support that concentration troops?
Yes.
Support that actually happened, and other than there's no picture documentation, narratives of that. Where that would have taken, where would these bodies have been tied?
Right there. I mean, just all over. I think one of the best pieces of evidence is a statistical one. You don't really need the bullet evidence to understand that between Cleburne's division and Brown's division, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of, at a minimum, 2,800 to 3,000 Confederate dead and wounded. And Brown's division and Cleburne's division run from about the Carter Gin, so just east of the road, west to, Natchez Street. And the bulk of those casualties are within a few hundred yards of the line. I mean, I think it's not at all inconceivable that Carter Garden area was just covered with, not just covered with bodies, heaped up in places. I know survivors said that they were piling the dead up to fire from behind the dead bodies because there wasn't any cover in that garden, and it's one of the few level areas in that immediate vicinity. So it helps, I just think it helps us better understand the kind of insanity that's playing out after the breakthrough. You know, we're into like the 4:30, 4:45, 5 o'clock period here. We often focus on the big, the big advance and the spectacle of it and all of that. This is, the sun's now gone down. Guys like Claiborne are already dead, and the fight is just dragging into the twilight. And for the Confederates, they can't go forward and they can't go back. So what do they keep doing? Fire. Just keep firing. They just keep firing for hours. Any other questions? Thank you very much.